The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 18. Feasts and Followers. A day in late January, 1996. Lucius paced the now familiar and well-worn path in front of the fireplace in the largest dining room of Malfoy Manor. He had just come from the Manor foyer, and had had the misfortune of watching the start of his next nightmare come to life. Eustace had answered the call at the front gate just after dawn, and had let them in. There were 10 in all, and she had made the decision to bring them to his home, seeking shelter. They had eaten first, his elves bringing out platter after platter of succulent breakfast foods, much to the delight of the newly escaped Azkaban prisoners, who had subsisted on stale bread and putrid water for many years. The noises they made were indecent, and Lucius was uncertain if he would ever eat sausage links again, after seeing the way they had been mauled by their guests. Several of them had fallen asleep at the table when they were done, evidently exhausted by their long stretch of time in prison, followed by their arduous escape. "Show me to my room, Lucy," the wild-eyed, raven-haired witch had said, smiling wickedly at him. It set his teeth on edge. But he complied. Bellatrix was not a witch to be trifled with. Once he'd sent Bellatrix off to a distant guest wing, Lucius and Eustace worked to chivvy all of the other guests from the manor. It had taken the better part of 2 days to locate house elves from each of their homes to come and collect them. In some cases, the elves had been quite lunatic. Left alone in great big manor houses with no master and no company for 15 years, tended to increase the probability of madness among elves quite a bit. Still, Lucius, Narcissa, and the Malfoy elves were left to entertain Bellatrix, Rodolphus, and his brother Rabistan. The winter, with the 5 of them there, was nearly unbearable. Rabistan and Rodolphus somehow baited the Malfoy white peacocks into cockfighting in the garden. They left the doors to the outdoors open at all hours, resulting in a chill throughout the manor, and they demanded food round the clock, running the poor house-elves ragged. Bellatrix threatened a different house-elf with bodily harm daily, resulting in Narcissa having to remind her that they did not belong to Bellatrix. She was also found sneaking into various wings and areas in the manor that were typically off-limits for house guests. Why did it matter that Lucius still had every toy stuffed animal he'd ever been given? Yes, they were held under a stasis charm in the 3rd nursery in the East Wing, but what of it? It was bothering no one, he reasoned. Add to this the superiority of Peter Pettigrew, who occasionally brought Lucius word of Lord Voldemort's improvement, as though bestowing a gift upon them, and Lucius was tired of all these people disturbing his peace. After 3 months of miserable meals together, Lucius could take it no longer. "Surely you wish to go to your own manor, Bellatrix, Maison Lestrange. You and Rodolphus and his brother surely must want your own space?" Lucius asked at lunch, one day in mid-April. The 2 men in question were rapidly picking their teeth for the last morsels of venison held within. Lucius made a Herculean effort not to sneer in disgust. "Dolph is welcome to go back home to his house and take his brother too," Bellatrix replied acidly. "I, however, have business to attend to." Rodolphus looked across the table in hurt surprise at Bellatrix's easy dismissal. "Really? What is that?" Lucius drawled. "I've needed these months to restore my health and beauty." The house-elf, Tiffy, snorted indelicately as she vanished the lunch plates, then popped away before she could be punished. "And now I must seek out my master. My lord awaits me." "Indeed? How lovely for you." Lucius said acerbically. "But are you certain you haven't been replaced, Bellatrix? It seems to me the Dark Lord has gotten rather cozy with others in his fold as of late." Bellatrix eyed him beadily. "You lie!" she cried heartily. "Don't be so certain," Lucius said, enjoying the bit of power and knowledge that he had over her. He had played second lute to Bellatrix for the entirety of the First Wizarding War, simply by virtue of not being willing to trade whatever it was she offered him for power. It seems he's sending someone new out on secret missions. "Who is it? Who dare try to come between me and my lord?" Lucius gave a humourless smirk. "Well, none other than the secret agent who is raising his child, of course." The shock on Bellatrix's face was worth every bit of power Lucius gave up in sharing that prized scrap of information. His child?" she stuttered out. "Oh, yes." Lucius smirked at the look of surprise and fear on Bellatrix's face. Did she really think that no one would find out? "Oh, perhaps that was supposed to stay a secret. Should I have not said anything?" Lucius smiled nastily. Of course he knew that Bellatrix already knew. The last time he had checked, it was rather difficult for a witch to give birth without realizing it. But perhaps she hadn't realized the secret was out. Perhaps she didn't want everyone else, especially her husband, to know. Bellatrix's dark eyes shuttered immediately. "Of course I knew, idiot! The Dark Lord and I share everything!" "The Dark Lord and I share everything!" Bellatrix retorted, though apparently the fact that he had sired a brat outside of their relationship was something he had failed to disclose, Bellatrix thought. Inside, she was racking with pain, seething anger, and rage. On the outside, she forced herself to keep calm. Her lord would explain all of this. Bellatrix stormed out of the dining room, leaving Lucius with the useless dolt Rodolphus and his weird brother. As soon as she left, the two Lestrange brothers hurried to their suites to collect their things to leave. They sensed that the meal train had just ground to a halt, now that Lucius and Bellatrix were openly fighting. As for Lucius, he was rather worried. He resumed his frenetic pacing that had been ongoing since that day in January, when they'd all shown up. He had unwittingly set Bellatrix hot on the trail of Richard Granger. Given the choice between following Bellatrix into battle and following Richard, Lucius would choose Richard, hands down, every time. But he wasn't sure that Richard would be any match for the insanity that was Bellatrix. His body still lacked strength. He was generally able to stand alone for short periods of time. Walking was strenuous, but manageable, so long as he needed to go no more than 20 feet or so at once. He was sleeping upwards of 15 hours a day. His food intake was meagre, and he still relied heavily on venom from Nagini. He needed his strength back. So far he was barely able to lift the wand of yew and phoenix feather. To that end, he kept his magnificent red, yellow, and white wand from the noble and ancient Scottish house of MacDonald. He spent an hour or so each day, using it to practice wand movements with the precision of an orchestral conductor. It was during such a practice period that Bellatrix arrived, storming through the kitchen door of the Riddle house and railing at the nearest Death Eater to help her find their master. And find him she did. "Master! My lord, I've returned to you. I beg you, allow me to be your most loyal servant once more." She dropped to his knees, caressing the Dark Lord's feet under his 2 short robes.
"Bellatrix, you have answered my call, at last."
"I have, lord, and now you have no need for other less faithful servants. I can be enough for you. There's no reason for you to carry on with this new-found agent."
"No!"
Voldemort's eyes grew wide, turning their red gaze on Bellatrix.
"No, this relationship is vital. I must keep them close."
She did not understand, he knew. If Voldemort did not allow Morphin's son to take his rightful place alongside him, everything could be ruined before he could gather enough physical strength and take the reins of power. Morphin's son Richard could seek vengeance for his father's imprisonment and eventual death. He could go to the Ministry or to Dumbledore and turn over his own memory of Morphin's account of what had happened that fateful day so many years ago on these very grounds. If the Ministry or Dumbledore knew of his own connection with the Gaunt family, his true secrets, the objects of his immortality, could be discovered and destroyed. No, the only solution was to give Richard what he wanted, a seat at the table at the right hand of the Dark Lord. "Perhaps there is another way," Bellatrix said coquettishly. "Perhaps we could make another." She ran her hands up his leg sensually. He was skin and bones, she could feel through the thin fabric. As she reached his lap, her hands found and closed around something odd. It was lightweight, hollow, soft, yet rigid. Red, white, yellow. It seemed vaguely familiar, yet also foreign. "What is this?"
"Do not touch it!"
He snatched it back hurriedly.
"Do not sully it with your filthy hands!"
Bellatrix's brows drew together. She recognized it now, not specifically where it came from, but for what it was. An ordinary drinking straw. And yet it seemed to have unparalleled significance to the Dark Lord. She drew her hand back. "My lord, my deepest apologies." If he wanted a straw, let him have a straw. Bellatrix's own father had carried around a shriveled monkey paw for years in his pocket. Who was she to judge? But if he expected to keep this new agent and this bastard child, to teach him or her everything he knew, to allow this usurper, this interloper, to take her place, she would not stand for that. She tried again. "As I was saying, my lord, we could try again. The past is rather imperfect. We could look to the future together." If the Dark Lord had wanted a child so badly, why had he not used her as the vessel to bring one forth? Why had he sought out solace in the arms of another? Why couldn't they have their own child together? And if this child thought they could take the place of Bellatrix Lestrange in the Dark Lord's army, well, that would happen over her dead body, Bellatrix thought. Richard had relayed to Lobo and the rest of the Order members the conversation he'd had with Lucius about retrieving the prophecy. The group decided that the best course of action was round-the-clock protection for the prophecy. It could only be touched by the person to whom it was made, the person that made it, or the person that it was about. Seeing as Professor Trelawney had no idea she had made it, and Dumbledore was persona non grata at the Ministry currently, that left only Harry Potter. Dumbledore felt that the contents of the prophecy were too much for the boy to handle, and so protection it was. seeing as only a few members of the Order had ministry access, it fell to them to offer protection in the evening hours when the Department of Mysteries was most vulnerable to attack. Lupin and the others dutifully discussed at length with Dumbledore the possibility of a trap, a lure to attract Harry Potter to the Department of Mysteries. They impressed upon the old headmaster the importance of Harry not falling for said trap. Unfortunately, Dumbledore was so concerned with the idea that Voldemort might be able to see into Harry's mind that he did not bring it up with Harry. And the truth was, Harry could see into Voldemort's mind, and it was both a gift and a curse. It was true, he could see every time one of Voldemort's followers was punished, but he was also able to see the true level of depravity and insanity within. It was a talent, or a misfortune, that greatly intrigued Harry's friend Ron. Any time Harry experienced so much as a brief or sudden twinge of pain in his head, Ron was there to ask him if he was seeing a vision of you-know-who. It was on an ordinary week-end visit in mid-April to Hogsmeade, as they sat discussing Harry's latest letter from Sirius, that such a twinge occurred. It was brief, only the quickest glimpse of Bellatrix Lestrange kneeling at his feet, begging him to let her be his closest companion once more. As Harry watched, a bony, pale hand grasped a straw from a Muggle hamburger restaurant. The hand pushed the straw firmly into Bellatrix's cheek and whispered coldly, "Leave me now. I must rest." When Harry woke from his fugue state, he was lying upon the bench at the Three Broomsticks. A small crowd gathered around him. He reassured and waved away the onlookers until it was only himself and Ron once more. What was it? Was it you-know-who? Harry gritted his teeth. Yes. What was happening? Was somebody getting punished? No. He was talking to Bellatrix Lestrange. Isn't that one of the nutters that escaped from Azkaban a few months ago? Yes, I think so. Blimey. Ron took a large swig of butterbeer, then choked, splashing it down his front. What? Asked Harry urgently of the sputtering Ron, who was pointing to a spot behind Harry's right shoulder. Harry turned quickly, wand drawn, expecting the worst. But nothing was there. Ron finally caught his breath. Sorry, I thought I saw something, but it was nothing. Apologies. So, you think he and Bellatrix are in cahoots again? The conversation continued on, then quickly changed directions when they were joined by Dean, Neville, and Seamus, who were eager to discuss the professional Quidditch matches played that weekend. Before long, the incident was forgotten by Harry, even as it rankled in Ron's head, because, for the briefest moment, he had spied a familiar sight. That night, he wondered if it had simply been a figment of his imagination, but somehow he didn't think so. It seemed nearly impossible, almost 2 years on, from the last time Ron had seen him. However, Ron had looked at Scabbers nearly every day for several years. He knew the rat well, and he felt nearly certain that the rat he had seen on the window-sill in the Three Broomsticks was his former pet. After thinking it over for some time that night in bed, Ron put it out of his mind. If it had been Scabbers, it made Ron glad to know that his old pet was out there, living his best life, free to enjoy the lofty adventures of a wild rat. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great 78.